Hello and welcome to the Disruptive Innovation Festival, a 3-week-long open access online event that aims to answer the question, the economy is changing, what do I need to know, experience and do? My name is Seb and I'm joined by my colleague here, Joe, and we're part of the Disruptive Innovations Festival's facilitation team. And we're joining you guys today to hopefully try and dig into some of these issues around money, why we should care about it, and some of the alternatives to the current system. We're very lucky today to be joined by a pretty prestigious and expert panel on the subject. We've got Ben Dyson, who's Head of Research at Positive Money, a campaign for a banking system that works for society. He also co-authored Modernizing Money, Why Our Monetary System is Broken and How It Can be Fixed. We're also joined by Brett Scott, journalist, campaigner and author of The Heretic's Guide to Global Finance, Hacking the Future of Money, expert on everything from Bitcoin to the digitization of our banking sector. Leander Binwald, his field of expertise is complementary currencies, currently based at the Institute for Leadership and Sustainability. From 2012 to 2015, he managed the International EU Interreg Project Community Currencies and Interreg Project Community Currencies and Action Project. And finally, we've got Becky Booth, co-founder of Spice and Spicetime Credits in January 2009, a system that values community time in a number of different ways. Becky has been serving as the CEO of Spice since the beginning of 2012. So as well as hearing from our panel today, we really want to hear from you guys. And there's two main ways in which you can interact with this session and ask questions. The first is if you click on the yellow tab, if you're watching this video in the event embed, you should see a tab that says join the conversation, and that means exactly that. There may be a short setup process, but if you click on that, you should be able to ask questions via our Q&A app. And you can also submit your questions in the comments feed, which is directly below this video. So anyway, without much further ado, I think one of the things we want to start with, the question we want to start with, is actually quite a philosophical one. And I'm going to put it to each one of our panelists, starting with Becky. So, Becky, what actually is money, and why should our audience today care about it?
I think money is really important. For us, money is a tool to make transactions and exchanges happen. And money is so important because it always has a set of values. And as you use money, those values are implemented throughout communities and across nations. And so having other currencies with other values is then really important. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a bit.
Yeah, and just to follow on from what Becky said, I think it's money affects practically everything that every aspect of your life. It affects how much the place that you live costs. It affects how much food costs. It affects the kind of opportunities you have for employment, and it's a system that, if it's designed in the wrong way, can have really negative impacts, and if it's designed in the right way, can be really beneficial.
So I guess a lot of people originally, tend to think of money as being this commodity type, this thing. I always say that money is a claim upon value. And to illustrate that, I've got this glass of water here. This glass of water is a store of value. It has something inside it that keeps me alive, without which I will die and perish. So that's something of true value. If, on the other hand, I took a piece of paper here, for example, and wrote that whoever has this piece of paper is allowed to drink the water, this becomes a claim upon value. So it's a claim upon this thing. Now, if this thing becomes widely transferable between people, that becomes much like a monetary system. And then you can have people writing claims upon this claim, which is something that Ben might want to talk about later.
Right, and I guess a lot of the things that I would normally say starting these on these questions have been said. It's really beautiful. So I guess I just have to finish up by saying, kind of at the moment we see money as kind of a necessary evil, and we couldn't do without, and nobody believes in that Star Trek world of existing without money. But as you understand money as a social technology that can be designed and can be different and can be multiple, it turns from kind of a daunting a necessity or political instrument into something that can be really creative and really showing the wealth and the diversity of what we humans can come up together, and probably just an expression of the new beautiful world that we guess is possible.
Great, thanks for that. So from the philosophical and theoretical and into an operation that is in community-based and local and happening now. Becky, if you could give us a little bit of an overview about SPICE time credits and how it works.
Yes, certainly. So SPICE at the moment runs about 36 time-based currencies, and you earn those currencies by giving time to community. So that's volunteering in lots of different ways. It could be a dad helping run an after-school activity at the local primary school. It could be a tenant of a housing association sitting on a board. It could be lots of people looking after their local environment. And for every hour that you give, you earn 1 time credit. And then you can spend it in lots of ways. You can exchange it for help from one another. You can exchange it back in the community organization where you earned it. So it could be that you gave 2 hours at the school, and then you take your kids along to a family school night. And then we have about 900 businesses that accept the credits. They're all time-based activities. So that's everything from a visit to the Tower of London to going along to the local leisure centre, always hour for hour. We've issued about 500,000 hours into the community, and we see lots of benefits around people feeling more confident, improved health and social care, health and social well-being, being more connected, feeling valued. And this kind of money kind of sits alongside existing money. We're not trying to replace existing money, but we think that existing money does some things brilliantly, but it does lots of things really poorly. And valuing people and building communities is one of the things that it doesn't do so great at. And that's where kind of time-based money comes in.
Cheers, Becky. And just to follow up, SPICE credits, do you have an actual note? Is there a hard currency behind that?
Yeah, we do. We have a paper-based system, and each of our currencies have their own front of their note that they design with community members. They are set, and then we have a standard back of the note. So it's very much about that local identity and a local currency. But you can trade in any area where we have a currency. So you could earn it in Cardiff and spend it in London, or earn it in Lancashire and spend it in Norfolk, because the back is accepted in all of our partners across the UK.
Thanks, Becky. So yeah, that's a really interesting example of one end of the sort of money spectrum. In fact, some people might even call it money. I wondered if I might bring Ben in this point, because Ben, you did a session with us earlier in the festival last week, in fact, looking at the money and banking system, and I wondered whether you might share some sort of thoughts on how, and we did get into it a little bit in that session, on how things around complementary currencies and new thinking around money fits into a sort of macro perspective, which I guess Positive Money is a campaign for the future of the whole of the UK banking sector, in fact the global banking sector.
Yeah, sure.
Easy question.
What Positive Money is focusing on is reforming the national currency. So whether that's pound sterling.
It was so groundbreaking that unfortunately we have lost Ben for the moment. I mean, maybe it's a good time to sort of go over to you, Brett, actually, as another diff expert and veteran, having done a session last week, and you were looking at digitization of finance then, and your blog and your book looks at sort of large financial sector and the digitization of both the mainstream financial sector and also some of the sort of things like Bitcoin, for example.
Yeah. So Ben's back. Well, I'm imagining what Ben was going to say, or maybe he can say it now, is, I mean, right now the money system is dominated by the commercial banks, and we sort of interact with that via an electronic interface. And really the the nature of our money that we use are these commercial bank IOUs. So basically claims that they kind of rat, and then we use those to transact with each other. Now, when we look at alternative currencies, and maybe I'll leave Ben to explain that system a bit more, maybe we can go back to him. But I mean, when you think about alternative currencies, part of the dynamic is thinking about how do you sort of take some of that power away from the existing concentrated commercial banking system to sort of make it more diffuse. And there's two sort of means of doing that. You either go down to a local level, for example, what Becky's doing, and you create these small local currencies. Alternatively, you can try to create these meta-scale systems, things like, for example, Bitcoin, which try to go completely global. So both of them bypass the existing systems, but with slightly different ways. Should we go back to Ben so he can finish his section?
Sounds like a good idea.
Thanks. Sorry about that. What I was saying is so the moment you have a system where money is created by banks, that money comes into the economy when banks make loans. So essentially it's a system that is based on bank lending, creating debt, and putting money into the economy that way. And there's real problems with that. I mean, for one thing, it led us into the financial crisis that we had before. It also means that we're dependent on bank lending in order to keep the economy going, basically. So we're relying on getting people to borrow more to go further into debt. And so what Positive Money is arguing for is changing that system, changing the national currency. Obviously, you can't do that unless you get government buy-in. So where the complementary currencies become interesting and things like Bitcoin, which I think Brett will talk more about, is that these offer you ways of kind of fixing some of the problems with the current monetary system without having to wait for governments to realize that the whole system needs to change. And there's a lot of sort of different opportunities there to change things on a smaller scale.
Great, cheers. And maybe Leander, you could come in now and just explain why you think this is important for people. The kind of the average person in the street. Why you think they should be engaging with this subject and what they should be taking away from some of these topics.
Right. There's multiple levels even for the individual. Of course, it's very important to understand how money works at the moment, and for that, you can really only just recommend the material that Positive Money puts out there. Otherwise, you would at least always wonder what's going on in this global financial system, and probably also don't really understand the agendas that you see in the political campaigns and the election campaigns. You don't really know what politicians could do and should do, and unless you actually dig a little bit deeper into how money works and how it's issued and who gets it in the first place, you wouldn't, well, you're just disempowered on these levels. But on the other hand, of course, for your direct environment, for your direct interactions with people in your groups, in your communities, local or virtual or of any sizes, of course, you can just look at what's going wrong and what money doesn't do, and then find some potential complementary currencies to solve these things and patch over some of the cracks that we have in the big system at the moment. Or on the other hand, you could, of course, see it as a way of expressing yourself and seeing what you actually want to achieve, and take a design approach from saying where do you want to get to and which tool is appropriate to get there. And then the money that we know at the moment might just be a very crude and oversimplified thing, and we shouldn't always just think of what we know and then see how we can apply it. If you only had a hammer and you try to find out all the things you can do with a hammer, that might already be interesting, but if you really want to build, say, a website, a hammer wouldn't do anything for you, and you just have to come up with completely different kinds of tools and rules and ways of approaching these collaborations.
I've been very tempted to try and solve my computer problems with a hammer a couple times, Leander. Brett, I wondered if I might just flick back to you quickly. I just wonder, I mean, talking about the sort of future of money and the relevance to people, one of the big trends, which you explored quite a bit in your previous event, but maybe we could recap a touch, is this digitization of finance. I wondered if you'd be able to say just a little bit more about that and how maybe that plays out in your view.
So the concept of digitization, I mean, it's quite a broad area, and you can think about it on multiple different levels. Yeah, in the realm of currency, it refers to the increasing use of electronic payments as opposed to cash payments. In the realm of, say, interacting with your bank, it can refer to the increasing sort of scarcity of bank branches in favor of having electronic interfaces into the banking system. For this conversation, probably the most relevant thing is around the sort of payment system, and there's a big drive towards pushing all payments to be electronic. And one of the sort of points I was trying to draw on in my original talk, which people can probably view on your site if you want, is that actually cash is one of the only ways that we can directly hold sort of state money, as it were. Electronic money is always basically commercial bank money. So if you are being pushed towards a cashless society, it basically means you're being pushed towards a society where you can only engage in transactions via banking intermediaries. And we have reason to be concerned about this, or at least not be, it's not wise to be unaware of it, let's put it that way. And some of the issues I was raising about that is that in a society where the only way you can engage in payment is via banking intermediaries, you have the potential for surveillance of all your transactions, but with that, economic censorship, so potentially the ability to stop people transacting in things that authorities don't want. In this context, things like Bitcoin become quite interesting because they offer sort of one of these alternative ways of doing electronic payment that does not rely on the banking system. Would you like me to go more to the Bitcoin system, potentially?
Actually, maybe if you, I think you raised a really interesting point about you know, what a world would be like if we didn't have paper money anymore. And I think sometimes I have that conversation with people, and you know, there's almost an assumption that we still have it because of this nostalgic attachment to it. But I think you raised a really interesting point there, that actually it's more than that. There is, you know, we kind of retain some, you know, I suppose it limits some of the control that the banks would have by having some paper money in the system.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to sort of romanticize cash, as it were. I'm just pointing out the trade-offs involved when you try to make changes to economic systems. Actually, one of the problems with cash is that I was talking earlier on that people have this sort of fetishization of money in their head as being this like object, this thing that you push and pull around. And you know, cash is one of the things that maintains that illusion. You have this sense of these objects that you pass around, rather than the reality of money, which is that it's claims, socially constructed and politically constructed claims that we have on each other. So actually it's quite interesting when you look at some of the alternative money systems. Let's take a mutual credit system or some of the time banking systems. Sometimes they literally exist as a spreadsheet or a database that people record claims on each other. You know, and that's actually a very legitimate thing. You don't actually need to have these sort of physical objects to represent it. It just so happens that in the context of a large-scale banking system that the cash that we have is one of the few ways we can engage in anonymous transactions. So you've got to think about the trade-offs that happen when you remove that ability at a large scale.
Really interesting, Brett. And I just want to remind the audience, we've got a couple of questions in. I'm going to put those to the gang in a second. We've got these guys until 2:45. They're not going anywhere. We've looked at their time. You can ask them anything you want about the future of money or their work or their expertise. It's almost a unique opportunity. And you can do that in two ways. Just to remind you, you can click on the Be Part of the Conversation tab on the YouTube window, or you can, as a couple of you have done, put comments in on the event page. Actually, I wanted to bring Leander in, and Brett touched on the subject of transition town currencies, and we do have a question on that exact topic. And Leander, I wonder if you can help Caroline here. She's asked the question, how disruptive do you feel the transition town currencies, e.g. Totnes, Brixton and Bristol Pound, can be? I guess the question is, what's their potential?
Right. I mean, this is a hot contested topic as much outside the currency seen as insight. From the outside, of course, people always question, so why are you doing this? What is this good for? And economists would always say that that can't work, that limiting an economy and a means of exchange to a small group is a bad idea per se. And inside these groups, there's, of course, always different ambitions and different hopes for these currencies, what they could achieve and why they're doing this. And one common thing amongst all of them is that they are actually requiring quite a lot of work and energy, as much from the makers of them as from the people using them often. So the question that we also tried to answer a little bit with this EU project that we had, where we looked at impact of different kinds of currencies, from time banking to business currencies to local currencies, is really what difference does it make if you use something like the Brixton pound or the Bristol pound. And one thing that is very clear and obvious to see with these things is that they do a really good job in opening up people's minds and ideas to the idea that money can be different. Of course, in the Brixton pound, for example, that has these famous notes with David Bowie on. Of course, it's first of all a physical thing where you go like, oh, okay, money can look different, it can feel different, it can have images on that we actually associate with, that represent a community spirit or just a cultural preference. I'd rather have David Bowie in my pocket than the Queen. But then going into these conversations that you are bound to have when you try to pay with it, when you do pay with it, when you try to join the Brixton pound, you'll always have these questions about why would I do this? What is it doing? Are you trying to do something about money? All right, you think the monetary system is kind of wrong and we should have the Brixton pound, right? Explain me that. And then you get this conversation with people who might have never thought about it, with business owners who were ignorant or complacent or just didn't care about what kind of money they use as soon as it's cheap and easy for them. But there is, as I said earlier, there's a whole lot of things that are on the one hand going wrong with money, and there's a whole lot of other things that could go better with money if we design these tools differently. And thus having these currencies that capture a big audience and are so prominent in the media and in the community is a great way of starting to engage on these conversations. Of course, there's a whole lot of things to be said about connecting local businesses, local suppliers, local traders, and these currencies try really hard and do a relatively good job in doing this, but that is a domain that is not exclusive to currencies per se. You could also set up a local buy local campaign or a business network that just works as a marketing platform to achieve these things, but the currency always has this extra edge to it where it really blows open the possibilities and just is a great communication tool towards these new ideas that were so far completely under the radar.
So I find it very hard to argue with the idea that people would prefer to have David Bowie in their pocket over the Queen. I mean, that's definitely, I agree with that one. Becky, do you, just interpreting Leander's answer there, do you see people that use Spice make that connection between the credits that they're earning for your scheme and the kind of bigger picture of the money in their pocket and how the financial system works for them?
Yeah, in many ways they do. I think some of the things that we hear that kind of reflect that is around people often talk about the way that they're valued through the time-based system. So one of the big differences is that there's no price in the time-based system. So your time is worth the same as somebody else's, which for us, a lot of our work is based in health and social care settings, where people who are in, say, recovery or have mental health problems, or whether or not you're a school pupil or you're employed, unemployed, your time is worth the same. And that they kind of becomes very clear that that's very different to money, and money doesn't value them in that way, and that their hour in a monetary economy, may be worth very little, and that makes them feel like they're worth very little, and so it's often on that level that we begin to have conversations about what they would describe as what real money does.
Yeah, thanks for that, Becky. That's really a really interesting perspective. I want to just take a direct audience question from his name's Follow Michael on the Diff site for Ben, and he says the problem I face is people don't want to believe the monetary system does not want to work the way they think. They believe I'm crazy when I say banks create new money, and I would say there's nothing wrong with being called crazy, and maybe it's good not to be well adjusted to a profoundly crazy world. But I guess the question, Ben, is around communication and some of the challenges people experience when they're maybe trying to promote these ideas or trying to create maybe businesses or something within this context. Have you got any advice for Michael?
it's
So we might have lost Ben again. I'm just waiting to see whether we get him back, and maybe we'll throw the question to another one of our enthusiastic panelists who's still logged in. Of course, it's ironic that we're talking about the digitization of finance, and we have some digital problems. Let me throw that one to Brett, because obviously it's a big part of your work as well, and the work you do with the Heretic's Guide to Finance blog. And you obviously don't mind being a heretic or being called crazy, right?
Can you repeat the question for me?
So Michael asks the problem I face. The problem. Are you back, Ben? We got you.
Yeah, can you?
Yeah, we can hear you again. Do you want to try and help Michael's accusations of craziness?
It's a counterintuitive system, and it works the opposite to the way that most people think it works. And what we've really tried to do is just explain to people how it does work and show them that there is, for example, there's a paper from the Bank of England which explains how money is created, basically just confirming exactly that this is the way it works. When banks create loans, they create new money, and that is the way that most of the money in the normal monetary system is created. And if people take a bit of time to get their heads around that, especially if it's the first time they've heard it. But when people find it difficult to believe nowadays, we just point them to the Bank of England papers, which actually explain how it really does work.
Great, thanks Ben. I hope that helps, Michael. I wanted to. So we've got a couple of questions in particularly around. Oh, go on, Leander.
Just sorry.
Please do.
I'm supposed to write my PhD at this right moment, so I kind of have to justify and just say a little bit on this, which dovetails really nice, because it's not really only a matter of understanding. It is even to the level of the language and the words we use to describe these phenomena. The paper that Ben just mentioned from the Bank of England came with a twin package, so to say, one describing how money is created and the other one trying to describe what money is. And it's just a very curious thing that even in such high-level expert communications, if you look through this paper and start at the back of the paper where there's a glossary where the Bank of England tries to define the terminology, if you apply the definitions from the back to the front of the paper where they talk about currencies, and digital currencies, electronic currency, money, claims, IOUs, you realize that even there it's really confusing and there is no straight way of actually describing and discerning one way of money from another. And when the Bank of England tries to say what these new currencies are, it sometimes gets quite confusing as well. They get a handle on Bitcoin now, but even to that level, it is really a double-edged struggle to explain that to the lay person on the street, while even the expert discourse is really discombobulated still. So a lot to do in terms of education and awareness raising.
Thanks, Leander.
Over to you, Brett. I think you had your hand up there.
Yeah, I just want to say one of the reasons why it's quite interesting to use alternative currencies is in this job of trying to understand how the mainstream system works. It tends to only be through the usage of something different that you can, or maybe an analogy would be, you can only perceive oxygen if you're suddenly in a room full of methane or something. It's only with these kind of, because normally we're born into these monetary systems and we just take them for granted, much like you take language for granted. You don't think about how it is that you can speak English. It just sort of happened, at least for native speakers. Similarly with the British pound, people just they grow up in these systems and it just sort of immerses them. They don't really think about it. And using alternative currencies is quite an interesting way to sort of break those illusions. But one of the sort of lessons you can get from alternative currencies is that the idea of creating money is not necessarily a problem. For example, if you look at a town banking system or mutual credit system, people create money. They create these claims to use for exchange. The real issue is around the politics of who gets to create those and whose interests they serve. So if you look at a group like Ben's positive money, part of the dynamic isn't necessarily just about the creation, it's about who in particular is doing the creation. Because sometimes this argument can fall back into sort of conservative territory where people then say, oh, we should all go to gold, for example. We need to go to these hard metals because that comes from the earth and it's not created. It's not really the issue. That's not the issue. The issue is the politics of who gets to create.
That's a really good point. Thanks so much for that, Brett. I wondered if I could bring Becky into that conversation and also feed in a question from Mark Allen, who's asked, a group of us have been discussing a potential disruptive currency. That's an unusual group of people, I think. However, one of the stumbling blocks is how to actually launch the currency, since it is only of use and value when people are prepared to accept it. Do you have any advice? And I wondered if you might also feed into some of these questions around the politics of creating money, Becky, as well.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think on creating a new currency, I mean, we love designing new currencies, and I think it's a really fun, geeky activity to do. And I was amazed kind of how interested people are in creating currencies. And I think the guiding principle for us always with creating currencies is, what are you trying to achieve? So it's starting from that sense of, this is what I want the outcome to be, this is what we're looking to achieve, and then designing kind of features of the currency off the back of that. And thinking about, who's going to be earning this currency, who's going to be spending this currency, how is it going to be moving around, what form is it going to take, what's the value of it, does it track the pound, or is it time, is it something else completely different? And I think it's always being sure what it is that you want that currency to achieve before thinking about what it is that tool might look like, and that will really help you to create kind of currency that you're trying to achieve, I guess. And then on the other side of it, on thinking about kind of who creates money, who controls money. I mean, for us, that's an ongoing discussion in the organization. Our currencies are fiat currencies. They work in the same way as the national currency. And so we have lots of conversations about who's printing that money, and in our case, literally printing that money. And we often sit with a host organization, so that might be a council, a housing association, or a school that's kind of hosting project. But then in the mix of that, it's about how do you co-design that currency, and we do that with lots and lots of different groups and individuals within the community who have a chance to kind of say how it should be run, how it should be governed, and often it's the individuals using the currencies that are much stricter than the currency designers. So having currencies with lots of young people and youth groups, they're much stricter on each other about how that currency works than probably anybody else would be designing that currency. And it's just kind of letting it be kind of managed by the local communities whose currency it is, but recognizing that we have some non-negotiables. If you're choosing to do a SPICE time-based currency, everybody's time is worth the same, and that's not kind of up for discussion. So it's a real mix of co-design and creating local governance structures, and then having sort of non-negotiables. But for those of you that are interested in designing currencies, there's some really good toolkits, and Leander's going to tell you a little bit about where you can find those.
Right, sorry, yeah, I was, because we worked on this EU project together with Becky and many other colleagues from SPICE and many other currency designers from around Europe, and we have published a lot of these shared learnings and the findings and the experience that we had in a number of publications and actual tool sets with more than publications in there, and you can find most of that on the project website of this project, ccia.eu. Or you can just Google for the main publication that was called People-Powered Money. It's a guidebook. It's a handbook to implement and design your own currencies, and that speaks a lot about these approaches and the experiences and the best practices in coming up with new currencies that actually achieve or are designed towards achieving these sustainable goals, be that on the social and environmental, on the purely disruptive, or in the local economy domains. So if you Google People-Powered Money, published by the New Economics Foundation, there's only one link that will actually then get you to a free PDF of that book.
Great, thanks for that. Thanks for those clarifications at the end. Just a quick reminder to, we've got another 10 minutes, so we've got a couple more questions to get through, but if you have got a question, you need to send it in now, otherwise these guys, you're going to miss your chance to ask them anything you want about money, Bitcoin, alternative finance. In fact, if you can find something they can't answer, we might send you a prize or something.
Yeah, great. I had one interesting question just popped up in the back of my head as Brett was talking there about just about power dynamics around money. And personally, I find some of the language quite confusing. And I wonder, Ben, what your take is on that. Is language a bit of a barrier to kind of, normal people understanding some of the concepts that we're talking about here?
I think it really is. I mean, money and topic anyway, and terminology around money is really, really complicated. The word cash can mean maybe 5 or 6 different things depending on which context you're reading it in, who you're talking to, whether it's a central bank or whether it's a bank, and so it gets quite confusing. Mean different things in different contexts. You have to know that sometimes there are 5 different terms that all actually mean the same thing. Like sometimes liquidity, reserves, central bank money, all quite often mean the same thing. And sometimes they're used in the same paper. People will just switch and change. So a lot of that's a barrier to people really understanding how things work. And it's one of the things that we do at Positive Money, is trying out the whole system, so that because fundamentally it's not such a complicated system. We all use money. It gives you money that they've earned it in some way. Kind of process where, for example, a banking system is able to create new money effectively out of nothing by the nature of the way that they operate. They're in a sense getting some value for nothing, and these. So the underlying thing itself is quite simple, but a lot of the jargon gets in the way. On a slightly different topic, in terms of moving towards digital money, the Bank of England recently did a short paper saying that they were going to be looking at the possibility of themselves providing a digital form of money. And it's the first time, really, they're starting to recognize that as physical cash is dying out, that if they don't produce any kind of digital equivalent, then people are forced to just go and use the money that is created by banks, bank deposits. So they're actually doing some research into how they could be issuing digital money and how that whole system would work. And that's it may not sound like such a big thing, but it could be quite radical in the implications it has on the whole monetary system.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ben. That's really fascinating. We've had a question in that I think Brett's going to really love. It's around this power topic. Money and credit creation appears to be the silver bullet to deal with many problems society faces, from house prices to debt to poverty. Do you think politicians are unaware of modern money creation, or are they apprehensive about putting their head above the parapet to get this into the mainstream? Yeah, Brett.
All right. Yeah, I know. Of course, I think Ben can tell you he has more experience with this than I do, but Positive Money spends lots of time trying to sort of, I guess, educate not only politicians but also, say, the entire media. The media constantly perpetuates rather outdated and false ideas about money, and partially it's to do with just having been brought up in a certain economic paradigm that doesn't understand what the money system is, and part of it's also that they are also kind of like afraid to maybe show themselves to be stupid or not understand, and that's a very natural thing. Lots of people get in that situation, and when combined with this alienating language, people are often scared to sort of go out on a limb and sort of appear stupid. So that's definitely an issue. I'm trying to think what the rest of the question was. But yeah, one thing you've got to think about with large-scaled alienating systems is that they tend to work in the interest of technocrats. So experts can put them out and easily dominate the public discourse around them. And this is one of the big problems with the financial system right now more generally. And if you're thinking about how you want to, say, contest the power of finance, one of the interesting things to consider is how do you change the education system, for example, such that people no longer perceive themselves as being sort of financially illiterate and therefore unable to take part in democratic discussions around the financial system. So that's quite a sort of an esoteric topic worth considering. I mean, one last point I just want to make on our current money system. Our existing money system is actually, I'm from South Africa and I've spent time in small-scale communities that use alternative sort of reciprocity-based money systems where people have all these sort of intertangled webs of favors that they do for each other. And if you look at those old sort of community-based systems, they're often quite conservative and they often sort of tie people into these small local areas. And actually, if you think about one of the things that modern money did create was it enabled these sort of large societies to develop. So if you want to think about the history of money, the ability for us to have large-scale democratic societies is linked to the banking system creating these scaled systems of exchange. And sort of that whole sort of democratic consciousness is actually related to that. But whilst doing that, it has simultaneously alienated people from the actual what's going on in an economy. So there's a big sort of trade-off that's happened. And the sort of Marxist theory goes into this kind of stuff. The fact that we can't see power dynamics in our everyday exchange because it's been so abstracted. This is a bit of a rant, but definitely trying to sort of de-abstract it becomes a very important role. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's definitely a subject that we could talk about for a lot longer. I mean, it's great to have had you all for the 40-odd minutes we've had so far. Just in the last few minutes we have left, it would be quite nice to have a little kind of round through everyone, maybe starting with Becky and just taking the same order we did at the beginning, and just to kind of have a final thought on the kind of future of money, but also to point anyone who's listening, point them in the direction of some further resources, or if anyone wanted to find out some more, maybe just to give something that people can take away from this session to further their own research.
Yeah, sure. I mean, a couple of things. One is we would love to find some children's story writers that can turn some of this stuff into fantastic kids' books, so that you just grow up knowing about this stuff at 3, 4, 5 years old. So if there's anyone out there that does that, get in touch. But more broadly, if you want to see some of our stuff, our website is justaddspice.org, and there's a whole bunch of kind of videos and animations and case studies there about our work. And that's probably a good place to start, just in terms of looking at time-based currencies.
In terms of understanding how the whole national currency system works, we've got, again, like a load of videos and talks and things on the Positive Money website. That's all free, so you can go and sort of get your head around how that system works. And also in terms of the complementary currency thing, just to second what Leander said about the best thing that I've seen for explaining all this is the book by the New Economics Foundation, People Powered Money, and they're giving that away free online, so that's worth a read. Right?
I'd say the best resource for understanding this is your own experience. I think every single time you do some kind of transaction in the world or any kind of economic interaction, try and think about what's happening behind that. From the simple thing when you're tapping your contactless card on the Oyster terminal through to buying a coffee, think about those small-scale interactions, because those small-scale interactions are partially what form the gigantic economic systems at a meta scale that you then don't understand. So breaking it down into the small parts is quite useful. And also just try the alternative. That's a really good way. Download a Bitcoin wallet, get an account at the Bricks and Pound, for example, and just try them. It's the best way to learn.
Yeah, I guess that's really the essence to it all. Don't take anything for granted, even if it seems so normal. And there are alternatives out there, and maybe just to add to all the great things that were mentioned already in the resources, there is also university education on these topics now, at least at the university where I'm at, University of Cumbria in northern England in the beautiful Lake District, but also the currency course is actually taught in London. In April, we have a whole spring school around leadership and sustainability and alternative exchange systems, sustainable exchange, as we call it. So if you look at the Institute for Leadership and Sustainability, IFLAS, Google for these things, there's online courses and there's taught courses that actually you can use to build up to a master degree. And yeah, we'd be very happy to spread the ideas and the knowledge in whatever way through the books or in the courses, or just get in touch and ask. I guess all of us are always happy to get to point you at least to further resources and help to spread the word about these new ways of thinking about money.
Great, so there we have it. We've covered disrupting money in 45 minutes. I want to say a massive thank you to all four of our panelists this afternoon. It's not easy to get some quite complex and quite serious ideas into nice pocket nugget-sized pieces of information. I think you've done a really good job, and I know I've really enjoyed it, and Joe's been having a great time as well. But thank you also to our audience for your fantastic questions. This is the end of this session, but it's not the end of the diff. We've still got well, actually more than a week of events left to go, around 150 events left to go. I want to point to just 2 of those. We've got one starting at 3 o'clock, which is our next headline act. It's the Internet of Everything, Connecting the Unconnected. So from money to all-powerful internet, with Alison Vincent, the Chief Technology Officer at Cisco UK. So that's one that's been missed. And then we've got another on the same topic at 6 o'clock. We've got the Internet of Things Can Set Us Free. Maybe, with Phil Howard, who's an Oxford University professor, wrote a book on the subject of the Internet of Things and whether it's going to set us free or lock us up. And Sophie Hackford from Wired. So those are 2 events not to be missed, and check out the rest in the diff schedule. This event will be immediately available for catch-up. All the details of our panelists on the event page as well, and I know they'll be absolutely happy for you guys to reach out to them and ask them further questions if you have any. So thank you again so much to the panel. Thank you guys for attending, and hope to see you again at a future event on the diff.